And the families of the disappeared. I am supposed to talk to you about the CTF recommendations, establishment of the Office of Missing Persons, and the demonstrable reason as to why there is tremendous disappointment in the way that the office has functioned so far. Now, the first point that I want to make to you is that this should be seen in the context of the setting up of the CTF in 2016, pursuant to the declaration or the statement made by our foreign minister at the Geneva Human Rights Council sessions that we would set up 4 mechanisms of transitional justice. And the mechanisms were, of course, the Office of Missing Persons, the Commission with regard to reparations, the Truth and Justice Commission, as well as an accountability mechanism, which the minister said would involve internationals as prosecutors and judges. That, of course, was met with absolute hysteria on the part of most people in Sri Lanka on the grounds that under no circumstances would our war heroes be turned into war criminals by foreign judges or prosecutors. A fair amount of competition amongst our leading lights in Parliament that they themselves would go before any court that tried to talk about prosecuting members of the armed forces, that not a single soldier would have to face that fate. Anyway, when Mr. Mangala Samaraveera came back to Sri Lanka, the point that we made to him was that there is a debate in this country as to what the correct word in Sinhala or Tamil is for reconciliation, and what exactly transitional justice means. We said to him that, if this is going to be a serious endeavor, the president and the prime minister of this country should go out to the people and explain as to why they are proposing these mechanisms of transitional justice, what they are supposed to be, what they're supposed to entail. So the government said, yes, fine, please write a speech for His Excellency the President to deliver. We dutifully complied, but the speech was never made. Speech was never made. And I think therein lies one of the principal reasons underpinning the disappointment with regard to the work of any of the institutions that have been set up under the transitional justice umbrella. And of course, the key one is the Office of Missing Persons. Now, as some of you may well know, the task force set up was entirely made up of civil society representatives. We set up zonal task forces as well, forces as well, and we went all over the country, north, south, east, west. We had town hall style meetings. We had focus group discussions. We also had we also had discussions with key stakeholders, including members of the security forces and the government. We came up with a 900-page report, out of which there were 45 odd recommendations. We were to present this to the president of the country or to the prime minister. But both of them were not able to receive this report, and therefore we presented it at the presidential secretariat to the former president, Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga. Actually, as an aside, I'd like to tell you what we were told was the reason why the president could not be present to accept the report from us. Because on that day, They were inaugurating or laying the foundations for a Volkswagen plant in Sri Lanka, which, again, if you have any recollection at that time, Volkswagen was under international scrutiny for various odd business practices. And I know for sure, because His Excellency the German ambassador told me, that there would never ever be a plant that would come to fruition in Sri Lanka or anywhere else in the world. Anyway, these two gentlemen went to inaugurate the plant. It rained, they got wet, and they told that His Excellency the President had flu. Now, all of this I tell you because the point here is with regard to any of the recommendations of the CTA, or indeed with any of the countless commissions, what is lacking here is sincerity. Transitional justice is about, and this is the one, if there is one single message that we got from the deliberations of the task force, is that the state of Sri Lanka should acknowledge their responsibility in these atrocities. They want an acknowledgement of the truth. And from then, we can go on to the questions of yes, there were those who said that there ought to be prosecutions on the basis of that. There were those who said that no institution should be set up without their active participation, that deliberation should be conducted in the languages of the people who are affected, that there should be a sensitivity towards the gender dimensions of this, because a fair number of the members of the families of the victims are women. They have faced harassment before, and we need a strong, again, a very strong witness and victim protection mechanism. All of these things were in the CTF report. But as you probably know, before we could really get going, the government, in a very chaotic scene in Parliament, in which I don't think anyone actually had the ultimate bill or had read the final bill, passed the OMP Act whilst we were still deliberating. They wanted us to be party to getting people to come so that they could say that there were consultations and all of that. And we said, no, you are the government of Sri Lanka. You want to jump the gun and pass this legislation and set up this institution. You do it on your own. And we then produce, on the basis of the submissions that we had received, an interim report on the Office of Missing Persons, which contained a lot of the recommendations that I mentioned. Now, I want to come to today to ask as to why. Here we have an office. Two of those offices have been set up that were promised in 2015. That is the OMP and the Office of Reparations. Very little is actually heard about what they are supposed to be doing. Why? Very often, we all talk about the lack of political commitment, the lack of political conviction. Even in the Aragale, even in the Aragale, where did the question of disappearances, where did the question of disappearances figure with regard to the arguments for system change that everyone talks about? far as I know, I don't think it figured at all. And why is that? Was there a north south divide? Or was it considered that, look, we all know the fate of missing persons, and what we need to do is to reconcile ourselves to that horrible fact? Why are we going on and hammering away at this? On Wednesday in Chile, Mr. Gabriel Boric, who is the new president, passed legislation in parliament expediting the whole question of disappearances. They are still talking about, and this is the 50th anniversary of the coup that brought Pinochet to power. They are still talking about thousands, tens of thousands who disappeared. There are stories where closure comes when even fragments of bodies are given to relations. Now, that was 50 years ago in Chile. And in passing the legislation, I just want to say, quote to you what the president said. He said, justice has taken too long. This is not a favor to families. It is a duty to society as a whole to deliver the answers the country deserves and the country needs. I think that is very important. This is what the country deserves, and this is favor to the families. Yeah? So when we set about redefining or redrafting our social contract because of the dire economic circumstances that we face, should we not recognize that the reason for this is because we have aided and abetted and tolerated bad governance? And that if we are going to make a new social contract, we need transparency and accountability. And we need to know what the mistakes of the past were. Was the mistakes of the past were not just a question of not going to the IMF at the right point or restricting the tax base at the wrong point or foolishly believing that we could go to organic fertilizer overnight. It is also about the questions of soft power, of uniting a country, about the truth that goes with that, and the willingness to put behind those efforts the resources that are necessary for the answers to be delivered. There are those who will argue that accounting for disappearances needs two things. The political establishment needs to get out of politics because they're all complicit in disappearances. And quite frankly, that is the truth as far as Sri Lanka is. There isn't a single political party around, or indeed a political leader around, who can put their hands on their heart and say that they had nothing to do with the disappearance, either in colluding with the fact of disappearances or not doing enough to expose it and to provide redress to the families and the victims. The other one, of course, is that, as the Chilean case suggests, it takes a long time. I think that's the one that needs to be tested head on? Does it really take a long? Does it have to take 50 years, as in the Chilean case I spoke about? Or is it not the case that with the right political will, you can find out what happened, where it happened, who it happened to? Now, how do you get a government, a political establishment, a state to admit that it has done these terrible things to its citizens who they are supposed to protect? What is a state if it cannot protect its citizens? That's fundamental to basic political architecture. Can a state consider its citizens as being agents of a foreign power or being dangerous or threatening it or whatever it is, and therefore get rid of them or disappear them? Surely not. Surely not. So I don't have an answer as to why the whole question of the Office of Missing Persons and the whole question of finding answers with regard to disappearance. I can only think of the two things that I told you about the political establishment and the question of time. The other questions of more resources, of technical assistance, not that there are easy answers to them, but there are answers that can be found without too much problem. At the heart of the matter is the question of the willingness, the commitment, the conviction on the part of the political establishment that something needs to be done. And let us not forget, when I say that, I'm acutely aware that the so called national parties in this country, who have governed it since independence for the past 75 years, none of them, none of them have made the issue of disappearance, of expediting the work, of giving priority to the work of the Office of Missing Persons. They have been completely silent as far as that's concerned. And that in itself is an indictment, I think, on the politics of our country. Do we need a new Arabella? We need a new Arabella where people will recognize that, yes, there are differences on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of religion, that have been encouraged and nurtured by political forces, and that if we are to go forward, we have to go forward together, not on the basis of these divisions. And therefore, we have to come up with a vision of a united Sri Lanka in which these very hard choices have to be made. To turn around and tell the victims, families, the truth about what happened to them, so that there could be some form of closure, that there could be some answer. I think, yes, we do need a new Arabic, for want of a better word, where we recognize that there is a north and south, there is an east and west, but it's all part of one country. I have said this many times before, and I will say it again, and that is that if we are drafting a new social contract, if we are drafting a new constitution, I think there is no better guideline than the guideline that was given by Professor Avishai Margaret, who is an Israeli political philosopher, where he talked about civilized society and where he talked about the question of institutions not humiliating people and people not humiliating each other. The denial of the truth at the end of the day is a weapon. It's a weapon of state against its people. And that is quite simply wrong. We don't do something about it, we're never really going to heal and move forward. So I don't have a clear answer to the question of as to why we have to meet every year to commemorate the International Day of the Disappeared in Sri Lanka, apart from saying that at the heart of it is the question of political commitment and political conviction. How do you get there? Maybe it is about the new Arab about spreading the word that, look, what we have in this country is not just a crisis of economic misgovernance, but it is a crisis of misgovernance. And we have to look at all the aspects. It is about acknowledging the truth, telling the truth, and making reparations with regard. Thank you.